You're on mute, Gabe.
I know you've been teaching on Zoom for what feels like a gazillion years and still forget. Thank you for joining me this morning. So my name is Gabe Byars. I am faculty in the Occupational Therapy Assistant program here at Salt Lake Community College. Get all this out of my way. So today I'm going to be presenting on creating authentic assessments and really how to elevate student voices within our teaching. So with that, I'm going to ask people, never tell students this, but I tell students this all the time, is have your phones out. We will be using them to interact throughout the session. This is a QR code that takes you to a link which actually has this presentation shared as well as a handout shared. The handout could be particularly useful because it actually walks you through some of the steps we're going to talk about in developing open pedagogy. So today, big goal, we'll be talking about where we're going and defining what we mean by this idea of authentic assignments in open pedagogy and contrasting it to the idea of disposable assignments. So from there, talking about what it means to implement this from a student perspective. Unfortunately, no students were able to join me on our panel. It turns out this was scheduled during a time when all of my students have classes, but do have some great reflections and quotes from them to include. Then looking at this process of implementing. And from here, I hope you all can leave today with some tools to actually create your own open pedagogy and authentic assignments. All right, so first, I really want to give a big thank you to the Open Education Network. They put together an open pedagogy learning circle, and I went through a train the trainer group last spring and now holding this at Salt Lake Community College. And that has been influential in really shaping my thinking about open pedagogy and how to push us forward to that next step. So with this, I'm faculty at Salt Lake Community College. Salt Lake Community College, we're lucky enough to have been early adopter of OER and now quite a substantial impact to students. So have to praise my colleagues within Open SLCC. So my journey to OER and open pedagogy. So I teach within our occupational therapy assistant program. And with that, we teach a ton of skills. And very quickly, I realized that we don't give the students enough resources on these skills. So started the conversation on, well, how could we create an OER around the skills for occupational therapy? And very quickly in conversations realized I was biting off more than I could chew as a solo person. So they introduced me to this idea of open pedagogy that we're going to explore today. So with that, I actually created an OER in consultation with my students, where my students are listed as co-authors, and we're going to kind of chart the journey of this and chart some tools to use where we filmed videos describing skills, and then students went through to actually write up this, to help transcribe videos, to find resources for further knowledge, and really help through this process. So that's where we're going to go today, is to really chart this process. So with that, we are going to start with this process of describing what we mean by disposable assignments, authentic assignments, and open pedagogy. Talk about this idea of scaffolding, because when you first present this to students, it will be overwhelming, rightfully so. So how do we as instructors help make that a sustainable performance? How do we provide them the supports necessary for them to succeed? Uh, and then from there, we're going to finish off really talking about some of the more high-level concepts about the ideas of social justice, both with how we do this, who we do this with, and then how we move forward in a respectful fashion. So throughout this session, we're going to have some opportunities to hear from you all, to see quotes from students, and see some examples to really illustrate my own work with open pedagogy, how to move forward. So starting with this idea of describing disposable assignments, authentic assignments, and open pedagogy. So first, this idea of disposable assignments. So disposable assignments are what we consider your traditional assignments. You know, doing a worksheet, doing a research paper. And I love this quote by Wiley. They're assignments that add no value to the world. So a student spends 3 hours creating it. We as faculty spend 30 minutes grading it, and then it goes in the circular file. This gets thrown away. So not only do these assignments add no value to the world, they actually suck the value out of the world. This is an incredible waste. Waste of time, waste of brain power, both our time, but our students' time as well, and perhaps our students' time even more vitally. So what could this look like? Like I said, for example, your worksheets. You know, I do have my students do worksheets too. You know, just today, this morning, they turned in an assignment looking at attachments of the muscles of the hand. Great. They learn the material, but they added nothing. You know, what about discussion boards? Answer a question, reply to their peers. What about reflections? Right? Where we don't give that transparency for why they actually matter, why they connect, why they in more than just an assignment, a checkbox. What about those essays that only you and your students see? And the bottom line, if the assignment feels like busy work, it is. By definition, these are transactional in nature. Right? Our student is doing this work for a grade, right? To check the box. Right? It is no more than going to Starbucks to buy a cup of coffee. Right? Yes, they develop some content mastery, but that's it. So with this today, I want to use an interaction platform. I'm going to post a link in the chat, as well as you can go to minty.com and type in the code 2617 0550. So either click on the link in the chat or type in, go to the address above. So I want everyone to think about identifying on your traditional disposable assignment. Is it showing you this space to type in, care? If you type on the link directly, I think it will just immediately flow into here. Or make certain you're typing minty.com, Mentimeter comes into a login site, which is slightly different. So we're seeing just a great representation of what we mean by these disposable assignments. So I want you to keep this in mind moving forward, because we're gonna actually hope that we can start taking one of these assignments, say a book report, or your multi-attempt quizzes, a vapid reflection paper, which made me smile. Thank you, whoever put that in. And how can we make this more? So, example that I came up with. In the past, had students research on social determinants of health for a given health condition and create an infographic. This is an example a student did a few years ago. Really brilliant assignment, looking at oral health for people with intellectual disabilities. And yes, students left with great understanding of social determinants of health. They improved information literacy, improved written communication. But that's it. It died on the vine. Okay? This is a really cool piece of work. How could it do more? So we can really think about moving forward to an authentic assignment. With an authentic assignment, these are going to require students to demonstrate learning through engaging in real-world problems or real-world tasks. So instead of, for example, my health science students going through to do a research paper, well, what if they chart review a case with novel conditions, and they have to go and research these novel conditions that they don't know about? Evaluate the source. It changes the game. So instead of doing something that my occupational therapy students will never do within their professional career, write a research paper, they might actually. Instead, this is something they'll do every day. Right? Or think of computer science, doing problem sets. Well, what if they actually were to develop an app to solve a unique problem? It does just change the game, and it moves it beyond this idea of something that's disposable. They're creating something. They're applying their skills. So now go back to the Menti window and think about an authentic assignment. How could you take that same assignment that you just gave us and transition it to something that's authentic? I'm loving these ideas. We can see the increased depth of these ideas, where they're pushing this process to the next level, really moving it beyond. I love these. These are beautiful. So now the next step, we've gone from disposable to authentic. The next step on this journey was the idea of open pedagogy. So now students are learning and demonstrating that learning through their creation of shared content. So it has a lot of these pieces we've already talked about. I'm sure through this, you've already talked about the idea of sharing work publicly and open licensing through other open ed events, or you'll have that opportunity. But now we're doing something else. We are creating these new learning objects, and through that, we are creating value beyond the creator. So instead of being that disposable assignment that students do and then is filed away in the circular filing system of our trash cans, it's creating value. So same ideas. Okay, we went from the student doing a research paper in health science to reading a case study and researching unknown concepts. Well, what if students research and write a case study to be used by future semesters? Or for computer science, what if instead of just developing an app to solve a problem, if students develop an app to help students learn coding? That one definitely gets meta. Students learning about coding by writing an app to help other students learn about coding. But I love the concept. We can see where it really pushes to that next level. So we can think about these as being renewable assignments. So they're providing students opportunity to engage in meaningful work, adding value to the world, and providing a platform for future students to learn and continue to build. Right. So throughout this OER event, we're going to hear a lot about our 5 R's. This essential way that we make OER by having this idea of retain, reuse, revise, remix, and redistribute. This really becomes central because that's what makes it renewable. That's what really allows this to have life beyond one semester. So we're going to get there. See questions in the chat pop up. So now this idea, same things we talked about before, of disposable assignments. How could we make them renewable? So for example, what about social annotation of a shared reading? What about instead of just reading an article and posting on it, if they're actually marking up this reading, commenting on it, commenting on other comments, but in this shared open fashion, or contributing to an open textbook, or writing quiz questions? What about creating tutorials or learning objects for future students? What about creating advice for future students? Right? So we can see this way that now we are extending the life of these assignments beyond simply this transactional nature. So again, we can certainly think about a disposable assignment being a discussion board. Moving beyond this idea of social annotation, now you annotate a portion of the text you struggled with. Seek and share, find a piece of media that relates to the passage you read. And now we're doing something in addition. We're adding to it, right? We are building value as we move forward, helping future students learn. This is a really nice example. This blog post really breaks it down. In this case, sociology instructor decided instead of a weekly quiz, he would have students write multiple choice questions. Right? The entire process was very beautifully scaffolded. They provided support documents, provided guidelines, right? And the expectations built week to week to week. So the first week was provided a STEM and students wrote a distractor. Then the second week, they wrote multiple distractors. Then the third week, they wrote or the fourth week, they wrote a STEM and the right answer. And we can see how this builds and this really grows. So over the course of one semester, this works out to being 1,400 questions written by students. Right? These questions can then be used as an instructor for future students. So a question in the chat about, well, what are the benefits on engagement? So this is a pretty classic study by Hilton, looking at student perceptions of learning using open pedagogy. So we can see the bars set up for different aspects. So mastery, collaborative learning, critical thinking, effective communication, and learning how to learn. And students either ranked it as greater with open ed, equal to, or less than with open ed. And we can actually see that 90% of the students pretty much across the area felt like they got as much learning or more out of open pedagogy. And roughly about, depending on the category, about half of the students feel like they actually were able to get increased mastery or at increased thinking or increased communication using open pedagogy. Right, so we see this can really make that difference. Right, so with that, my own journey here. I told you about the assignment where students created an infographic looking around social determinants of health. I wanted to make this a little more. So in what I actually had students do, in this case, is they will be researching a condition and related social determinants. And from there, writing a case study, incorporating that research in course content. These case studies will then be compiled into an open educational resource. This is my first semester rolling out with this assignment. I'm excited. And my hope is that we actually can do this in a flexible, open fashion. So occupational therapy and occupational therapy assistant from across the world can contribute to one open education case study reference. So now, I want you to put yourself both in your instructors, but also your students. What is your reaction to the idea of students creating open content? Right, so thinking again from your perspective as an instructor, but also from your students' perspective. We can see a bunch of different perspectives. And in talking to students, one of some of the key aspects that came across from them is, on the one hand, this idea that this is scary. Right? But on the other hand, this idea that it makes me want to bring my best Gabe. There is a level of comfort in knowing that your assignment will be thrown away, knowing that it doesn't matter, but at the same time, the added skin in the game is really powerful. We see a bunch of other aspects in here as well. For example, this idea of consent, which we'll talk about. Ideas of how. It's a great idea, but how do they do that? Which again, we're going to kind of move into next. Ideas of social justice, elevating voices, which we're going to hear from. Okay. These elements of fear, but also these elements of vetting, which are really important. That we'll touch on today. I don't think we'll cover it in full, but we'll have some time to chat about it. So now the idea of scaffolding. How do we, because it is really intimidating to say that I'm going to put my work out there. I'm going to do the next. I'm going to share this. Right? So what we as instructors need to do is to scaffold this experience, provide the supports necessary for the students to succeed. So the idea is we're going to, again, provide that support for the students as they're learning the skill, but then gradually fade, step back, and let the students move forward. This, I'm not trained as an educator coming into this from a clinician, from the occupational therapy side. This makes sense to me because this is what I do in the hospital. This is what I do on my everyday. So this is a nice roadmap to think about scaffolding that I use all the time. So starting with this idea of expectation setting, give an idea what the students will be doing. Okay? I commonly use examples. For example, use previous student examples to show the students what they'll be producing. And again, the great thing about this open framework is once you go through a cycle, right, this automatically starts to happen. Right? So once I have these open case studies out there, there'll be more examples for the students to look at. Oh, this is what I need to do. This is how I move forward. Educating students on this idea of what working in the open means. And as mentioned before, consent is an important piece here. Training in the tools that they'll be using. Students do the work, but we're checking in with them repeatedly and making certain they have what they need and they're able to succeed. They're turning it in. The students are choosing, agreeing on their level of ownership and authors and how much it's shared. And this finally, we are checking licensing, checking for accuracy, making certain that everything does look the way we want before it goes to this final version. So some tools to use. I really love this I do, we do, you do framework. UDL, Universal Designs of Learnings, and thinking about examples and guidelines. So the I do, you do, we do framework really is just that. First, I as the instructor demonstrate, and the student is more passive. From there, we do it as a group. And then finally, our students take over and they do it. So for example, mentioning our students writing up case studies. We're using a common framework that we do with an occupational therapy, the occupational profile. The first time they did an occupational profile, I led the occupational profile and they watched. Then we did this in small groups and I was able to mentor and walk through them. And then finally, now the students are writing their own occupational profiles. So we have this idea of universal design of learning. So from here, the idea of universal design is effectively that all design should be usable by all people. So instead of, again, near and dear to my heart as someone who works with the disabled, is instead of thinking about access and providing a ramp for someone in a wheelchair, well, all buildings should be accessible no matter what your mobility is. Why make a special ramp and stairs? Let's make one common accessible interest that is usable by all. Great work by Thomas Debian. I've provided a link to his website. Presented here at Salt Lake Community College several years ago, and really great mindset. Think about universal design of learning. Think about those questions you get every year and that you answer repeatedly. One crucial aspect of universal design for learning is providing supports to answer these questions before they're even asked. Right? This is a great principle to start thinking about. So if you're thinking about your open pedagogy, picture ahead to those questions you will get and provide the supports so that they don't even need to be asked. This is a great infographic looking at UDL. Some of the critical aspects there is providing multiple ways of engaging, representing, and acting on the material. So throughout this process, think about multiple means. So very commonly within my instructions, I'll provide a written instruction, I'll provide a template, I'll provide examples, I'll provide a rubric, I'll provide a video lecture to, again, engage that student wherever they're at the moment and provide those supports. Right? And then moving on this idea of examples and guidelines. So very much tying into what we talked about with UDL, right? But providing these supports to answer the questions before they happen. Right? So think about, for example, guidelines. The earlier example in sociology instructor created 1,400 multiple choice questions. They created these great guidelines for both writing multiple choice questions and providing feedback, and put them out there ahead of time for students to answer their questions. Think about examples. Right? So by providing these examples of previous students' works, students have something to work from, have this visualization. Think about templates. I commonly use templates to help guide the work. Right? And also, honestly, think about your rubrics. Writing rubrics in a way that they're readable to students and that students can use them as tools to check their work. So, hearing from you all, what have you found as examples of scaffolding that have helped you within your teaching? I like the idea of choice menus. Building learning competencies, short demos, examples, guides. They're great. Modeling skills hands-on before asking to demo. Students create the rubric. Roadmaps. YouTube video creation, branching scenarios. Breaking large assignments into smaller chunks, brilliant. step-by-step instruction, especially with technology, you and me both. These are great. Explain various with open licensing as one aspect of the assignment. Nice. Live workshopping. These are, so you were seeing this idea, and you're seeing how you're already doing it. So some examples from my own work. So I showed you at the beginning examples of the OER that I first created, demonstrating skills. So with this, what I actually did when I was starting to develop this process is develop a template that all students could use, where students knew exactly what to write in each section. And then once the process started rolling, once students had submitted their initial assignments, once they're edited and we're able to start compiling them, really by about the middle of that first semester, we had examples that students had previously turned in, posted on the OER that students could go back and look at in an open fashion. So we started providing examples. Within the case studies that we're developing, okay, we're working from a almost universal document, the American Occupational Therapy Association's occupational profile. This is a framework that we as occupational therapy practitioners use in all of our settings, working with adults, working with pediatrics, working with people on hospice. So this is a framework that we use repeatedly as a profession, and that we kind of use as a unifying principle across our course. So we're using this as the framework where they write a case study. Again, one of the things I'm excited about the idea is that since the occupational profile is universal, right, other occupational therapy educators can use this within their institution, and we can contribute to one giant OER. All right, now moving on to the idea of social justice. So thinking about social justice and OER and open ed, there's a bunch of different pieces that we can talk about. We can think about redistributive justice. By definition, for doing OER, we should make our resources open and accessible, and we make that access point equitable. Versus some of my textbooks cost $150. Right? We're breaking down that barrier. We can think about recognitive justice, where we're bringing in a greater diversity of materials and perspectives. And I would argue that making our material open pedagogy propels us to the next level, okay? As well as on a representational justice. We're making that next step, because almost by definition, our students are more diverse than we are. Right? Kind of one of those universal, unfortunately, seems like universal laws of education. The further you go down the educational path, the less diverse we are. So we should be capturing that diversity. So things to consider. And who has access to the resources? I will say, as a big piece from individual who works with people with disabilities, is don't start with open access, but also consider usability. Okay? How can you make your open resources accessible, usable, valuable to the widest range of people of differing abilities? So think about whose voices are represented. Okay? Think about voices. Think about perspective privilege. Mentioned the Open Learning Circle. They compiled a great list of images and media that are available as stock images that present a much broader perspective than your standard textbook. And then finally, think about ownership. Open pedagogy allows for the co-creation, but also a more complex ownership of educational resources, which we'll speak about. It's a simple question. Do you see yourself reflected in your current resources? I think it's a nice thing to ask yourself. Because if we aren't reflected, then our students are. And we can see the number of voices coming in here that some, yes, they feel like they're reflected, but many don't. And again, one of those kind of universal statements with education is that if you don't see yourself on the other side, it provides a barrier. All right, so now back to that idea of ownership. Open pedagogy asks students to be authors and creators. That means they are also the intellectual property right holders. And that they must have agency. They do have agency to decide on copyright. We cannot do open pedagogy if students do not have that choice to either opt in or opt out. So this is a nice way to consider this process. We have kind of two bars, a challenge level and an audience level with some suggested activities at each spot. Okay? So think about this process for your students. For example, with the open case studies that I'm developing, we're going to give students the option to position themselves on this spectrum. Do they want an object that is only viewed by me? Do they want an object that's open and shared under their name? Right? Do we want an object that's shared with anonymity? So by providing students this option, they situate themselves at a place of comfort. That said, I think it's also inherent that we as instructors educate our students on what it means to be open, the value this has, right? And how much we as instructors value their work, right? So talking with students about this process, and I mentioned how scary students find it, that I'm asking them to put their work out there, right? But at the same time, what's happened with those students is as I'm talking about them, there's a flip as they realize that I actually think they have value to add to the world, to add to this. I think other occupational therapy educators want to hear their voices. There's that next step of like, oh, right? One of the things we commonly talk about is this idea of the imposter syndrome. By saying, you know what, your work should be out there, you're automatically starting to counter that imposter syndrome. So now we can move forward with agency. All right, so start thinking about educating students. What do we mean by open educational resources, open pedagogy, copyright, and licensing? Consult with your students on the potential options for open and provide those students with optioning so they can give consent. They can choose their license. They can opt out if they choose. So now, thinking about your students, that same assignment that you started with, that you converted to this idea of being a renewable assignment. Think about what would it be like if it was an aspirational assignment? What would it be like if it's at that comfortable? Depends on the student. So for lab report, comfortably post a class creating a website, aspirational, add institutional repository for a broader discovery. Love it. Yep. Reviews are more comfortable than creating something from scratch. Wiki editing, Wikipedia article creation, more challenging. Oh yeah. This is another thing that I think somebody pointed out in an earlier slide. Open pedagogy creates valuable resources for you too as an instructor. Think about just redesigning one assignment of yours. Talk about value. These are beautiful. All right, so like I said, I did want you to hear from some of my students. So these are reflections from my students that went through the process of creating that OER I showed you initially. They came at this from a bunch of perspectives that really has some value. This idea of, I realize this is a super useful tool for me. I can look back, right? Realizing that, future students can use this. Okay? But more so this idea of learning. Our students get comfortable in a student perspective. I'm training occupational therapy assistants. They will teach clients. This really shifted them out to a teaching perspective, really shifted them out. We're writing in a professional fashion. Great reflection from a previous student. This really honed in on learning, honed in on preparation, honed in on professionalism. Okay? The effort, forged this connection between the students and the professor, as students saw firsthand the amount of work needed for students' achievements. And that increased time to practice and learn. They're feeling more versed on what they're doing. So students will see the difference. So from here, what are your next steps? So looking, of course, an open eye, reevaluating assignments with students' help. Need to take risks, be creative, redesign assignments, engage with faculty members, develop a workshop. Share what you learned, please do. These are great. I was really hoping somebody would put coffee refill, but these are wonderful. So now I kind of wanted to turn it back to open group with question and answers, with things in the chat that I've missed, because I'm sure there are a lot, and any kind of outstanding questions from here. This again is a QR code that will give you access to the full presentation, as well as a handout that will kind of walk you through these steps of transitioning to an open, from a disposable to a renewable open pedagogical assignment, embracing these themes.
Gabe, we have, I think, 4 questions in the Q&A. So first, from Andrea, I'm helping a faculty member transform a disposable assignment to one where students create openly licensed videos. It's been challenging to get students to understand the idea of openly licensing their work. In the world of never-ending sharing via social media, it doesn't seem to register that an openly licensed video is different from any other content they create. How do you suggest scaffolding those concepts?
Well, first, it was Amanda, correct?
Andrea.
Yeah. Andrea, sorry. Yeah. So Andrea, if you can, actually, I know I've got one for you. I showed you the OER that I created. Show students, like, more than welcome. I'm going to flip over, grab that tab for you. This is a given page. First, have that conversation, show them as this an open educational resource created with open pedagogy, with open videos, and talk about the difference. So talk about now with a video that, a traditional video that I create, where I am logging on my personal views, or I don't even know what, show you how much knowledge I have in vlogging. That is my content, and you cannot reuse it, share it, do whatever. Whereas the videos I created are open in a way that anyone else can grab them, remix them, share them simply by citing. And I have had other institutions adopt the OER that I shared. So yeah, I think partly is have that conversation of what it could be beyond just a video that is dying on the vine. Does that help?
All right, I think we have time for one more question. This one is, I'm getting lost, it's from Allison. I'm getting lost on how this remains valuable over time. For content creation, it seems like the first wave of students get the greatest learning gain, with future editors having less gain. For other ideas like creating questions or creating code for future classes, it seems like those future classes then use what was created but don't create anything new on their own. If they are continuing to create these things, at what point does any of it actually get used?
Think about a building growing experience to be the first piece. If you really design something truly being renewable, the OER that I first presented is open, but not as a renewable assignment semester by semester, just by its nature. It was valuable for 2 semesters, and then now it's more static, and now it's in a revision process, which I'm involving students more tangentially. Okay? But the case study assignment, this is a very different assignment, because the first round, they're creating case studies. The second round, they're adding to that list. So this semester, my students will write 23 case studies. And the next semester, they're going to write 20 more, and then 20 more. So now you see this ballooning resource, right? And it's similar to other pieces. Think about this app that we talked about for computer scientists teaching the code. Start with a simple concept. The first students write concept 1. The second students write concept 2. Third students write concept 3. Right? At each stage, it has value, but the value is growing. So if you can think about that broader piece, I think about the growth, think about the pushing forward to really make it renewable, to extend beyond one semester, to theoretically through your career. I hope that helped, Allison.